All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for joining episode 9 of the Ask Greg series. And already my computer is trying to do me crazy here. My name's Greg Alevris, and I'm a Horizant Solutions employee. I'm specifically in the business development group. And I am an aficionado of ARCHIBUS, had 28 years at the company. And I'm here to discuss the product capability and share experiences with the broad functionality of ARCHIBUS with everybody. And I hope you've been finding these sessions useful, and we have been posting them to YouTube. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just kind of a refresher for everybody. The guidelines are we'll start with everybody on mute to conduct the presentation to minimize background noise. And I've locked the cats out of the room so that they won't interrupt the presentation. At the completion of the presentation, we'll open up the meeting for questions, and we'll do that by using the question box that appears in the chat dialog. So all you have to do is go ahead and submit your question in writing, and we'll go ahead and address them. So what is this series meant to do, and how can it help you if you haven't participated in the past? Well, of course, it is to help showcase the capabilities of ARCHIBUS. It is to share some of the knowledge and experience that we've learned from working with the clients and what the clients have shared with us. It is to help us engage with the users of the product and better understand some of the things that they're looking for, and create a library of materials, which right now you can find a lot of that on our YouTube channel that we've set up, and help eventually grow a community forum for us to interact. So today's agenda is, we'll start with a question of the day. I'm gonna kind of give a quick refresher on setting up recurring costs, because they are what drive a lot of what we're going to be doing. I'll then go through a very quick example of how to schedule a cost, and then we'll just review some of the reports that the system generates and wrap up. Hopefully today's session will be a quick one. And one of the questions that I think a lot of people are interested to know is, does ARCHIBUS manage financial transactions? And the best way to answer that is to stay tuned, and we'll address that during the course of the presentation. So the first thing I want to do is kind of get a handle on what are the recurring costs that you set up, and how do they relate to using the cost administration feature. So of course, typically everybody would think of the rent that is paid and set up within the system, but there's a bunch of other things that you could pay for the client. They include things like parking fees. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, by the way. They can include utility expenses. So in some cases, landlords may include a flat fee to pay the utility bills rather than having you pay directly for them. They could be for cleaning services. So there might be a weekly or monthly fee that you have to pay to do that. And there might be what we'll call common area maintenance, or better known as condo fee, for those residential owners. What kind of payment plans do you set up? And typically we think in terms of a fixed payment schedule, so that we negotiate a contract. The deal is we're going to pay, let's say, $1,000 a month, and there's no escalation, there's no changes, there's no timeline. But that's usually on a year-over-year lease. A lot of the leases that we sign are multi-year agreements with a lot of different rules of engagement, if you will. So some include things like step payment increases, and that means, like, for the first couple of months you pay 0 rent, for the next few months you pay the $1,000, and then it escalates to $1,100 for the next 12 months, and then $1,350, and whatever the numbers are that you've negotiated in the agreement. And so there are specific start and end dates for each of those steps, and it's easy enough to set up. Others involve percent escalation. So there's a pre-negotiated automatic increase in the rent cost. It could be 1%, 2%, 3% a year, or it could be more elaborate and based on something like the consumer price index. Today's example will just focus on a straight flat rate percent escalation. So it's easy enough to set up a recurring expense for a flat rate. If the term of the lease is 5 years and the rent's $1,000 a month, then you just set up a recurring cost that is a 5-year period and you're all set. For a setup on a step rent, it's a little bit different. The rent stipulates what the rent will, the lease stipulates what the rent will be on each given period. And so what you need to do is schedule the base rents to match those dates. So step one is the rent rate will be $15,569 for the period of February 5th to the February 4th of the following year. Then the rent goes up to $16,209. And then the rent finally transitioned to $16,452, but it's the course of many years that remain for the lease. So it's actually a flat rate rent for those last years of the lease agreement, even though the first 2 years had a very easy step. And so what that means is in step one, we go ahead and identify the amount of the expense in the column, and we set the dates in the start date and end dates. Very straightforward. Year two, we do the same thing. We set the amount of the rent and what the expense will be, and again define the start and end date. And then year three, we do the same thing, and the only difference is in that final stage we go from 2018 all the way out to 2026, and paying the same rent year over year, month to month, so on and so forth. Now, there are ways that you can set up an escalation in your lease where it's automatically determined what the increase will be. In this example, we have a lease that was initially signed in the year 2007, and the initial rent was $20,000 a month, and it started on May 7th in 2016, or 2007, sorry. Now, what we're going to do is go ahead and literally, talk about a period of some years just to show how the rent has changed. So every year we're increasing the rent for, those monthly payments by 5%. And if we look at starting in 2016, the rent has gone from 20,000 up to 32,577, and each progression thereof, and the system automatically calculates the increased cost year over year. So even though in the document, when we set up the recurring record shows the $20,000 payment, it shows the duration of the lease going all the way from 2007 to 2016. The only difference is that there is an escalation rate that should be set up at 1.05%, which is right here. So there's a yearly factor that we set up that basically says each year that the lease changes, I want you to increase the rent by 5%, and the system automatically calculates. And of course, there's just a fixed recurring cost. So, if there's a duration of a lease that has an expense, for instance, like maybe cleaning or maintenance, whatever it is, it's $4.8 per month. There's no annual increase, and it's paid monthly, and its start date goes from the 2016 to 2026. So for the period of the lease, the maintenance cost is going to be a flat fixed fee that you have to pay. Now that we've set up those recurring costs, we need to convert them into schedule and actual paid costs. So what does ARCHIBUS do to handle that? And so what we're going to do is just kind of run a quick video here, and we'll take you through the sequence. There is in cost administration a wizard that kind of helps you manage those. And so we'll use an example of one of our leases. Specifically, we'll go look at lease 001 for the year 2021. And in 2021, these are the various payments that are due. We'll start with the base rent. At this point in time, we're at that 16,452 for the period of 2018 to 2026. So it falls within that date range that we were talking about for the year 2021. So we're going to go ahead and schedule a cost to be paid. And what we want to do is schedule the payment for the month of April. So we'll actually get that process going now. So all the payments that are due in April will be set up. And what we do is we then go to the tab that says approve. We look at the rent that was generated, which is April 5th for that month. What we're going to do is take a look at it. And in that rent, there's the number for the rent. It is generated because of the auto recurring setup that we have. And, the only thing that we have to do, of course, is approve it, which means we can then say that we know that this is the rent we're going to pay, and we want to make sure that it gets done. And before I progress, so back to the question of the day, and let me get to the review cost thing here, because this is the important aspect of what we're doing here. As we look at that review item that we're talking about, as we look at that review item, one of the things I wanted to mention, so the way ARCHIBUS is set up, it is meant to help make sure that you know what rents have to be paid and when to pay them. It does not pay them by itself. That's not what ARCHIBUS does. It's still meant to work with your finance system. So whether you do this as a means of triggering a call to finance, or you set a automatic feed up, the point is that the actual disbursement or the receipt of rent checks, or the payment of rent checks, which is this example, does not happen from ARCHIBUS. This is simply to make sure that you know that it's time to basically set up a check, for the rent to be paid in this particular case. And if need be, update the status when it is done to show that it has been paid, and identify when the date was paid. That is the sole purpose of ARCHIBUS. Other than that, it's to make sure that you synchronize, whether it's a manual process or automated, to make sure that you're talking to your finance system and working through the process that way. So tips for success on doing these, and again, just as a reminder, the real estate group is managing the process of scheduling and getting the rent payments set up to be taken care of. Finance is the one that manages the money, and we don't want to change that with ARCHIBUS, but we do want to communicate with finance, and we want to make sure that when the payments are made, that date is recorded in the system. And that's there was a good example that happened many years ago in one of the ARCHIBUS conferences that I recall, where one of our customers had actually set up this whole process to do exactly what we just described here, and it worked great. They set up the rent, recurring rents. They did the scheduling. They sent the information to finance electronically, and they left it alone. They missed one step. They forgot to verify payment, and the way they found out is that the landlord or the property owner came to the president of the division and asked why they weren't paying the rent. And it was simply because the data was going over to finance, but there wasn't a check or a validation to make sure that the date paid was being filled in. And so they fixed that loop and closed it and took care of business going forward. So again, the whole point is to make sure that when you're doing your process, you track it all the way to the completion of the payment and make sure that it's properly recorded. Once you've done all these steps and set yourself up, it's a simple matter of just going through each of the leases and tracking all of the data as to what the lease was, and how much was paid, when it was paid, so that way you can go back and inspect all of the actual costs that should have been taken care of within the system. You might also want to just see what the impact on monthly cash flow is for each of the different leases, and ARCHIBUS does a nice job of summarizing what the expected, scheduled, and unanticipated actual costs are by recording all of that data. So you can drill down into a specific lease, look at all of the different cost patterns that have set up for the system, and then drill down into and look at the actual detailed costs being spent for the system. So ARCHIBUS does have a lot of detail. It also does a nice job of summarizing the expenses so that you can see the distribution of money from a rent point of view, from utilities, from maintenance expenses, and then look at the metrics around how much rent you're paying per square foot, and tying it back to the area that is being leased or the area that's being used on the floor plan. And by using some of the key metrics from the performance metrics framework, you can drill down into the operating expenses and maybe get a sense of how the money is being distributed out to the various divisions and organizations that are actually occupying the space that you're using in the floor plan. So ARCHIBUS does a nice job of, once you have the data, being able to review it by location, by organization, to do that. So in summary, the important thing to do, of course, is plan your recurring costs based on whatever the lease agreement is. So whether it's a fixed pattern for the term of the lease, whether it is a step rent with different rents for different time periods, or whether it's a rent that starts with an escalation based on a flat rate or by consumer price, ARCHIBUS, it's good to set those up. And then it's very important to make sure you manage that full cycle process to schedule the costs and make sure that the rent payments are made in a timely fashion. And then when all is said and done, use that data to understand where the money is going, and also tie that back to some of your other facilities data to see how well your facilities are performing in general. So with that, I am going to open it up for questions, and I'll pop the camera back on. So go ahead. Let's see what questions we have. If there's any questions that people would like to submit.
Hi, Greg. I've got one here.
Yeah.
What is the added value of cost administration versus lease administration?
So lease administration is important because it helps set up all the details of the lease. It defines, the agreement and the duration, and of course what the rent schedule is for it. Cost administration actually focuses on the actual the transactions associated with making rent payments and things like that. So the lease looks at the broader, details, where cost administration specifically focuses on looking at the cost patterns and making sure that you're tracking all the details. Next.
Yeah. How would you set up a cost to escalate based on the CPI?
I'd have to check into that. There's actually a place in ARCHIBUS, and I forgot where it is. I'll try to research it and get an answer out for that. But there's a place where you identify the CPI, and what you have to do is go out and pull that into the system for each given year, and then ARCHIBUS applies it if you've verified that you're using the CPI to manage the cost escalations. But I forget how that's done, and I will look into that.
Perfect. We'll get back to them. And another one, does ARCHIBUS have a standard integration with any finance software?
Not in general. It obviously uses the connector technology to do the integration, but there's not like a standard connector for, Oracle or SAP or Workday or any of those platforms out there. But we have customers across the board using a variety of these financial systems, and ARCHIBUS does integrate with them very, very easily because of the connectors.
Great. Just wait and see if any others pop up. Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, let me go ahead and continue on here. And so our next episode will focus on the other aspect, which is cost chargeback and invoicing. That will be episode 10. And that'll cover how to apply the cost for leases and do the chargeback model, as well as deal with some of the invoices from a landlord perspective, because one of the things ARCHIBUS does is give you the ability to be one or the other or both. That session will be on Thursday, March 18th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, and so we look forward to seeing you there. And again, if you have any questions, please submit them to askgreg@horizonsolutions.com. So with that, I think we're all set unless there's any other questions. No?
No, I don't have anything else listed.
All right. Well, everybody have a good day, and we'll see you in March. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.